Next, I'm going to talk about 3-betting from the other side, when you're in the big blind and the one pushing the action. Just like defending versus 3-bet, this is going to be a different strategy from 50 big blinds to 75 big blinds. As stack to pot ratio decreases, there are less tough decisions. First, the chart. Here's an example of a 15% 3-bet range. The difference in adjusting from our default 3-bet range compared to other areas is that when we make adjustments, we'll be adding hands to certain areas and removing others. What I mean by that is certain hands play better versus certain players than others. This chart gives a decent default range to figure out what type of player you are dealing with. For example, if I begin by 3-betting this chart, well, 75 big blinds deep, and realize my villain rarely folds to 3-bets, I will adjust by adding my Broadway cards, a few more ace-x hands, and begin eliminating some of my small suited connectors and suited gap cards. I also will begin eliminating my paint rag suited cards. If I'm playing a villain who's folding to too many 3-bets, I will begin to add more suited small cards to my range and actually eliminate some of my paint rag combos. So you may ask, why do I do this? Well, if he's folding to too many 3-bets, that means that when he actually continues with a hand, it is likely to be Broadway cards or a decent sized ace or something like that. Having a hand like King 2 suited in our hand can make for some awkward post-flop play if we flop a king. Even if he doesn't likely have us dominated, we're still forced to play a little more cautiously since we're out of position, and we have deep effective stacks. Adding a hand like 6-2 suited instead means that when we're called, and we do hit our big hands, we can be comfortable playing them. Remember from earlier, the goal of deep stack play is to flop a bigger hand than our villain when he thinks he's the one that has a big hand. I think smashing trip 2s on a King 2-2 flop with the 6-2 suited versus him defending King Queen is going to be much easier to play than if we had, say, King 3 suited on the King 2-2 flop and he has the King Queen. In practice, you'll find these hands much easier to play versus these types of players. Okay, so there are some things to keep in mind as you're modifying your range. Try to avoid ace rag hands. The reason is when an ace comes on the flop and you c-bet, you are already repping the ace. Say you have ace 2 and you 3-bet, and you flop an ace. A lot of times you'll take a similar line as if you had total air. And you will likely end up winning more money by having the air. Imagine the line you would take if you had 3-bet a random hand and the flop had come ace 8-3 rainbow. You'd c-bet the flop and let's say a jack comes. You might barrel again and then potentially give up when the 10 comes on the river. If you do decide to bet the river, if you get called, you're going to lose. You also will fold if you check the river and the villain bets. Now let's take this same run out, but give us ace 2. We 3-bet preflop and hit the ace on the ace 8-3 rainbow. We bet the flop just as we did before and the jack comes on the turn. Now say we bet the turn as well like we did before and get called. How do we proceed on the river? If you bet the river and get called, you're likely going to lose, just like before. If you check and your villain bets, you're also likely going to lose as well. However, this time you may actually call the river bet, even though you're more likely to lose than win. The only real difference is the times the river checks through and you win at showdown. It just puts you in some very difficult spots. Okay, next, try and avoid the bottom half of Broadway cards versus people who fold to a lot of 3-bets. These are hands like Jack 10 offsuit, Jack 9 offsuit, or even 10 9 offsuit. I already went over this a bit, but when people are defending 3-bets tight, a lot of their range is going to include those Broadway cards. And those Broadway cards have you dominated a lot of the time. I'd rather just defend out of position pre-flop with these weak Broadway hands and keep the hands that we dominate in their range still. So now, paint rag suited hands. I'm talking about King 5 suited, Queen 2 suited, etc. I have a love-hate relationship with these hands. They're too strong to fold, but difficult to play out of positions as stacks get deeper. These are very good hands to 3-bet with when stacks get shallow, but can be potentially dangerous when they're deep. When shallow, being dominated isn't nearly as bad. You don't have as many chips relative to the pot, and it won't be as costly when you're behind. Since, of course, stacks are shallower, and you can only lose what's in front of you. You can also get stacks in by the river if you want to, without your villain putting in a raise. As stacks get deeper though, you can get in a lot of tricky spots when flopping a hand like top pair and not really knowing where you're at. Also, you're not always going to be able to put enough pressure on your opponent when you're running a bluff, and you also leave the door open to get raised on the river. The last thing I've mentioned here are small pocket pairs. By default, I don't 3-bet these. Unless you flop a set, they can't really improve. An exception to this rule may be against a player who opens a lot, but plays passively post-flop. He also folds to a lot of 3-bets. In this case, you likely make more money by 3-betting and taking it down pre-flop than you would by peeling a min-raise and folding when you miss a ton of the time, and only making the minimum when you hit a set versus a player that doesn't seem like he wants to put a lot of money in after the flop. When you do 3-bet and he calls, you can be sure that he has a stronger than normal range. Now if you do happen to hit a set, you're more likely to get multiple streets of value.